today's political and social climate, the well-being challenges faced by Black LGBTQAI plus individuals are more pressing than ever. This community is not only facing discrimination from broader society, but also often within their own racial, sexual, and gender minority communities. And this is contributing to a sense of isolation and heightened vulnerability. In this episode, we're going to explore the importance of belongingness for sexual minority and gender diverse Black individuals with Dr. Konjit V, a core faculty member in the clinical psychology doctoral program at Fielding Graduate University. Dr. Page's research focuses on racial and sexual orientation identity in psychological training and research. She is also the founder and CEO of New Page Consulting, a company dedicated to providing diverse and inclusive solutions and interventions for the tech and entertainment industries. According to the research, almost 25% of Black women identify as sexual minorities. Let's maybe start by having you define what we're talking about when we're talking about sexual and gender minorities.
So when we're talking about sexual and gender minorities, for sexual minorities, we're talking about individuals who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual. It can also include, that's why we use the plus, it can include individuals who are pansexual, asexual. I'm always learning new ways of identifying in the community, but so it's broadly that way for sexual minorities. For gender diverse minorities, we're more speaking about transgender identified folks who identify as gender nonconforming, as well as folks that might identify themselves in some way as gender fluid. So in all, not really adhering to the kind of binary of man and woman.
I know that you use culturally centered practices in your clinical work and also your commitment to doing work around BIPOC and LGBTQ communities. How did you come about developing the study that specifically looks at belongingness experiences in both Black and LGBTQ communities?
So you know how they say the saying that research is me search? Yeah. So that kind of reflected my experience. So this particular study actually comes from my dissertation. And at the time when I entered graduate school, the first program that I was in the state of Massachusetts. And around that time, there was the hot debate of whether same-sex marriage should occur. Massachusetts actually became the first state in 2000, I think it was 2004, to legalize same-sex marriage. So at that time, I had been out, I identify as a queer woman of color, cisgender woman of color, and I was still very newly out. I had come out right before I went to grad school, and then I went to grad school and I was in the kind of Boston scene at that time. And it was my experience first was feeling very alienated from the predominantly LGBTQ plus spaces that existed. I often encountered racism in those spaces, to which at the time in my mind, I was surprised because this is a marginalized group. Wow, how can you further marginalize people in your group? So that was occurring. I was doing a lot of work around racial identity at the time. I was working with Dr. Janet Helms for a few years around that time. So she actually was very supportive in that I was curious about, in the literature, there wasn't much about queer women of color, but in particularly Black women. I think I remember the first book I ever read was Bev Green and Lillian Comas Diaz's Lesbians of Color. And that just was like, okay, we exist. We're here in the literature. We're doing this work. And so I wanted to, Bev Green is, I'm a huge fan. I'm forever a fan of Bev Green. I wanted to follow in those footsteps and contribute research that would speak to my particular community. I wanted to see if the concerns or experiences that I was facing at that time in the Northeast was similar to other folks. What was also nice was around that time too, there was this small community called QWOC, Queer Women of Color Boston, that was being developed, and I became very close friends. Their name is Spectra Asala, and became very good friends with the organizer and started doing some partnering work of, hey, I'm learning all this stuff about mental health and psychology in my field. How can I share that with folks? How can I share that with my people? And so it was through kind of these different dialogues that we were having. We had some panel sessions about mental health in our community that I came up with the idea that, I really want to explore this idea of what it means to belong and what it means to belong when, and at that time we weren't talking about intersectionality a lot. This was intersectionality was definitely past 10 years has been talked about the most. But at that time, we were looking at multiple minority identity statuses. And so I was following that literature, and it just kind of just all coincided at the same time. The context of the times, the community that I was with, that really led me to want to pursue this particular study.
I'm so appreciative of the fact that you called upon the women that have paved the way for you, for me, Janet Helms, of course, you said Beverly Green, and so many others that really are important for us to be able to do this work. Mm-hmm. But I also like how you talked about the context, and the timing is really critical. Thinking about that, especially what's happening right now in American culture, what's it like to be doing this type of research?
I still find it that it's very much needed and is very important. In particular, working with gender diverse folks that are Black or BIPOC. We see so many anti-transgender bills that are going up. I was just looking at some recent research that was saying that we're having an uptick in suicides by transgender folks as we see the number of legislations go up. So it's definitely research that's still much needed to not only influence communities, but also to influence policies at the same time.
So central to what you're talking about here, it sounds like, is stigma. And in your article, I liked how you use this term intersectional stigma. Can you sort of describe what that means and how it plays out in your work and the findings around Black sexual minority women?
So with Black sexual minority women and gender diverse individuals, they're particularly vulnerable to intersectional stigma, which is where both racial and sexual orientation-based discrimination combine to amplify psychological distress. So what we did in the study was, this was a theme that just kept arising amongst participants, that it wasn't just that I'm experiencing anti-Blackness. It wasn't just that I'm experiencing homophobia, or it's not just that I'm experiencing sexism. I'm experiencing this unique identity of them intersected, of being a queer, Black, female, or gender diverse person. So that was something that was just throughout our work. So we called upon Kimberly Crenshaw's work on intersectionality, and that was kind of helpful in providing a framework for how we approach the study.
One of the themes that you identified was the rainbow is not enough. And I thought that was a perfect title for that theme. Can you describe for us what you meant by that and what were the findings?
Yeah. So one of the primary findings was that Black sexual minority women and gender diverse individuals face ongoing racism within LGBTQ plus spaces, which are often white-centered. You can think back to kind of the way some of the things were structured back then was really relied upon Vivian Cass's model of homosexuality, which wasn't really created for folks other than white cis gay men at that time, was often applied. Many of our participants reported feeling excluded or marginalized in LGBTQ plus spaces, which, again, as I mentioned earlier, there's an expectation that it should be more inclusive because they're already marginalized, but instead that those spaces prioritize the needs and experiences of white cisgendered gay men. It was really that general idea of, I should be able to go into this queer identified space and I should feel at home. I should feel like I belong. But then I enter into the space and people who are not Black are basically telling me and giving me indicators that you're really not like one of us. You're different. And so there's this disappointment that's felt. There's this lack of sense of belonging that's felt within the community, that Black voices were never really meant to be a part of that particular community. As an antidote to the side, I can remember, being like a baby queer and going to nightclubs and I would go in there and I would see white folks and they'd be very friendly with me. But before I even really talked to them, they would start saying, "Girl, hey, oh my God, your hair is so pretty. Can I touch it? Then there would be all these microaggressions that would happen that, I don't know, there would be like this false sense of closeness that white queer people had towards me because they felt, oh, we're here, so I can now say all these things and you're not going to take offense. So that mimics a lot of experiences that participants in the study actually had as well, that not feeling fully connected to the community because their race wasn't accounted for.
On the flip side, then, what were your findings around their sense of connectedness to the Black communities?
I think one of the things that was particularly interesting finding about that was this notion of covert acceptance. So for some participants, there was a decision that they distinctly made that they did not feel that they would be affirmed for their sexual orientation within their families or kind of, those that are in close proximity to them. And because whether it be the Black church, whether it be their Black families, because they received this kind of alienation from family, what they decided to do was, okay, these are protective factors for me, protective factors for my racial identity, how the world will generally see me. They will see me as a Black person. I need my family. I need my community to provide me with the resources for me to deal with this, right? You don't want to lose that. That's a hard way to be in the world. So what some people did was this covert acceptance. Well, I'm just not going to talk about it. We're never going to mention it in the family. I might have a girlfriend, but that will just be called my friend. Could be living together. That's still auntie's friend or something. But it was almost this piece of, okay, I have to make peace with who will accept me or not. And I still need to get resources around my racial identity.
What do you think was the most powerful insight that you found from doing this project?
So one of the things that I feel was an insight, and this came from the interviews that I had with participants, was that they didn't really feel like they had a space to talk about this. They didn't feel that there were people in either of those communities, either the Black community or LGBTQ plus community, that they could have these conversations with. And in being community with other Black LGBTQ plus folks, it was more of, I want to spend my time with that community. I don't want to talk about the bad stuff that's going on. So in many ways, there was this unawareness of what I'm experiencing is also being experienced by others. I think I got that in an aha moment when halfway through the data collection, we provided a tentative analytics summary of what the data was showing at that particular time point. And we provided it to the participants to get their take on, is this resonating with you? Does it sound right? Or what have you? And the one thing that they consistently said was, I am so glad I'm not the only one, that there are other people, just knowing that this experience I'm having, we're all kind of having this experience too. So I think that was helpful. And honestly, that was probably what I took out of that as well. And for me, it became about all right, now I've done this study and I'm still going to be doing work that's related to BIPOC, LGBTQ plus populations, but I need to make sure that it's accessible to folks, and I need to reach out in the many ways I can. So ways that I express this or, continue this study is through my teachings, courses that I teach. I'm very inclusive in my courses. We talk about intersectionality all the time, even in history and systems. We'll still talk about intersectionality, courses you don't expect it to come up. Well, I'm talking about it. And so I think that that's been helpful. It's shown up there. It's also shown up in my clinical work. Right now, my caseload is primarily Black, gender diverse, or queer identified clients. They tend to come see me. And then in my consulting work, it's all about inclusion is what I focus on. So that permeates in there from a real intersectional viewpoint.
What are you going to be doing next in terms of the research? What do you think you're going to look at that's related to this type of work?
So honestly, and maybe if I say this, I will follow through on it, like impetus to do more about it. But, from this, I've always wanted to write a book that my community members can access, not an academic text, not necessarily another academic article. I could do that, but I don't think it would make as much of an impact until I make it a way that it can be accessed by people who are in my community or people who work with people that are a part of my community. So I would say I'd probably like to expand that. The purpose of the dissertation was to create a substantive theory around these issues. The next step would actually be to follow up with a quantitative study with a larger population, taking into account some of the findings and seeing if these are experiences that are widely experienced by folks across the US. That would probably be the next study that I'd like to do.
I do agree with you that it's important to do a book that reaches the populations that aren't in academia. And so can you expand a little bit more about why that book is important and what kinds of things you would want to address?
I think that type of book would be important for the community because I don't feel that Black women and gender diverse folks' voices are heard as much when we're talking about the larger LGBTQ plus population. It's also not talked about as much when we're talking about largely the Black, usually heterosexual population as well. So there's this unique space that it occupies that I think is missing in our knowledge bases about how we think about both communities and how we think about both communities intersectionally. My ideal, like in my little heart, I love the idea of a 20-something-year-old who is just now coming out, who is Black, who is a sexual minority or gender diverse, and to be able to hear and read narratives of other folks just like them and what that process looked like, how they navigated it, how they showed resiliency, and what that means for folks. Because I think something like that, so, I'm an academic now. I mean, I'm other things too, but I'm an academic now. So it makes sense that I got to hold Dr. Green and Dr. Gomez Diaz's book, Lesbians of Color, because it's really in the academic sphere. I want somebody to feel the way I felt towards when I first got a hold of that book, my book, that's a member of my community. That's probably like the dream goal of what I would like to do with that. And also just open up the dialogue nationally about our particular experiences, because we out there, we're mothers and sisters and aunties and nibblings and we're in the family, we're in the communities, so it's time that we know more about us.
That was Dr. Konjit V discussing her research examining the well-being of Black sexual and gender minorities. To find out more about Dr. Page, including accessing her research articles and social media handles, go to this episode's podcast page on our website. We really appreciate that you listened to this episode of the Psychology of Black Womanhood podcast. Remember, we have some great guests already lined up for our upcoming shows. So be sure to check out our future episode topics by going to our website's podcast page at www.psychologyofblackwomanhood.com. We also love hearing from our listeners, so keep telling us what you think or want us to explore. Just leave a comment on whatever platform you're using to access this recording. And to keep up with our other projects, just follow us on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks for joining us.